All right, let's dive into one of the most misunderstood, most controversial books ever written, Niccolò Machiavelli's The Prince. Today, we're going to peel back centuries of myths and misunderstandings to get to the heart of what this book is really about. And to get there, we've got to start with a couple of, well, pretty uncomfortable questions. Just let that one sink in for a second. What if all the rules we try to live by in our personal lives, what if they just don't apply in the brutal arena of politics and power?
This right here, this is the central problem that Machiavelli forces us to look at. It's that massive gap between how we wish the world worked and how it actually does.
And that is the absolute key to understanding it. Machiavelli isn't writing a manual for becoming a villain. He's describing the world he saw, a world where power has its own kind of brutal logic. And to really get that logic, you have to understand his world.
You see, The Prince wasn't written in some quiet academic library. No, this book was forged in the political inferno of Renaissance Italy. To get the book, you first have to get the man and the insane moment in history that made him.
I mean, look at this timeline. It's a roller coaster. For 14 years, Machiavelli was a top diplomat for the Florentine Republic. He was right in the middle of it all, seeing wars, betrayals, shaky alliances, you name it. But then, boom, 1512, his entire world just collapses. The powerful Medici family comes back, and Machiavelli is immediately fired, accused of plotting against them, thrown in prison, and even tortured. Think about that. In 1 year, he went from being a respected statesman to a complete outcast.
So, it's from this place of total ruin that he writes The Prince. And you have to ask, why? Well, on one level, it's basically a desperate job application to the new bosses, the Medici. He's trying to prove, hey, I know how this game works. You need me. But it's so much more than that. It's a warning. It's everything he learned from being in the political trenches, all distilled into one short.
And that phrase just says it all. He wasn't interested in dreamy ideas about how a perfect ruler should act. He was only interested in what worked, what failed, and why, all based on what he had seen with his own 2 eyes.
So, with all that in mind, let's open up this toolkit he created. What are the core ideas that made this book so revolutionary and, so controversial?
This right here is the game changer. For centuries, political thinking was all about morality. Philosophers would ask, what makes a ruler good and just? Machiavelli just tossed that question right out the window. He separated what's personally moral from what's politically effective. He asked a much harder, more practical question. In a dangerous world, what does a leader actually have to do to stay in power and keep the state from falling apart?
To answer that, he says there are 2 big forces that shape everything. First, you've got fortuna, which is basically luck, chance, fate. He pictures it as this wild, raging river that can sweep everything away. But then you have virtù. And be careful here, this does not mean virtue, like being a good person. For Machiavelli, virtù is a cocktail of strength, smarts, adaptability, and the guts to make a bold move when you have to.
So here's the point. You can't control the river of fortuna, right? But you can use your virtù, your skill and foresight, to build dams and channels to manage it. A great leader doesn't just hope for good luck. A great leader uses their skill to prepare for bad luck.
And this brings us to his most famous and probably his most chilling question. It cuts right to the heart of leadership and human nature. So, what do you think?
His answer is just ice-cold logic. He says, sure, it'd be great to be both, but if you have to pick just one, pick fear. And here's why. Love is flimsy. It depends on other people's feelings, which can change in a heartbeat. Fear, on the other hand, is based on the threat of punishment, something the ruler controls. It's just a much more reliable tool for keeping order. But, and this is the part almost everyone misses,
this is so important. Being feared is not the same thing as being hated. Fear makes people follow the rules. Hatred makes people want to overthrow you. So a ruler can be tough, even severe, but they can't be seen as a predator who just takes what he wants. Don't steal your people's property. Don't mess with their families. This isn't advice on how to be a tyrant. It's a strategic calculation for survival.
So how do you pull that off?
How do you maintain fear without tipping over into being hated? Machiavelli says a ruler needs to be two animals in one. You need to have the strength of the lion to just scare off your enemies with raw power. But you also need the cunning of the fox to see the traps that brute force can't save you from. It's a brilliant metaphor, right? Power isn't just about being the strongest guy in the room. It's about being the smartest.
And this leads to another huge idea: politics as a kind of theater. Machiavelli knew that people judge what they see, so a leader has to project an image of virtue. They have to appear merciful, honest, and religious to the public, but behind the scenes, they have to be ready to do whatever it takes to protect the state, even if it completely contradicts that public image. It's a pretty radical insight into how much public perception really matters.
Okay, so we're talking about ideas that are 500 years old. Why on earth do they still hit so hard today? Let's connect the dots to our world and see why Machiavelli is still so essential.
First things first, let's bust the biggest myth out there. Everyone quotes Machiavelli as saying the ends justify the means. He never wrote that, not once. His point is actually more of a sad observation. He noticed that in politics, leaders are ultimately judged by their results. If you save the state, people tend to forgive the methods you use to do it. It's not him cheering for immorality. It's a cold, hard look at how history actually works.
So what are the real takeaways? First, power plays by a different set of rules than our personal lives. Second, the best skill a leader can have is adaptability, not just sticking to one moral code. Third, how things look is often more important in politics than how they are. Fourth, keeping a state stable sometimes means making some really tough, morally great choices. And maybe the biggest lesson of all, it's smarter to understand the world as it truly is, rather than clinging to a fantasy of how it ought to be.
Just think about modern politics for a second. Every press conference, every campaign ad, every tweet that's been reviewed by a dozen people, it's all a performance in the theater of power. Machiavelli got it 500 years ago. Perception is reality. This whole focus on image and messaging, it's straight out of his playbook, whether politicians know it or not.
And it's not just in government. Think about the business world. A CEO analyzing a rival's weaknesses, making a strategic deal to corner a market, or making that painful call to lay people off to keep the company from going under. That's Machiavellian logic in a boardroom. He wasn't just writing about princes. He was writing a guide to the mechanics of power itself. And this is why the book is still so challenging. It holds a mirror up to our world and forces us to look at that uncomfortable collision between our ideals and the way power actually functions. He doesn't give us any easy answers. He just makes us ask the really hard questions.
At the end of the day, Machiavelli didn't invent political cruelty or deception. He just had the nerve to write it all down. The Prince is still so important not because it tells us to be ruthless, but because it gives us the clarity to see the world as it is. And that kind of wisdom, well, it might not be comforting, but it is absolutely priceless.